Hello and welcome to the pamphlet instructional video. I'm going to show you in this video how to make 4 different versions of the pamphlet binding. Pamphlet binding is a relatively simple binding. It allows you to combine, a gathering of pages called a signature with a paper cover wrapped around, and it's sewn through the fold. So this is an example of a 5-hole pamphlet with a flush cut paper wrapper. This is an example of a 2 signature, so a double pamphlet binding with a 4-edge turn-in wrapper. So this has a slightly longer wrapper that, when doubled over, kind of gives the book gives the cover a little more durability and stability. And this is sewn all at one time, the cover and the 2 signatures. And then I'm also going to show you a more decorative version of this binding, which is called the chain stitch. And so this is the same story. It's a single signature. So I have 7 sheets here of copy paper with a paper wrapper that is flush cut on the front and then elongated on the back and cut into a triangle. It tucks into a little slot in the cover here, so it sort of holds itself closed. So there are lots and lots of options for your cover. There are lots of options actually for your sizes. This is a really flexible binding. It's a really nice, it's a very simple binding, but it's also capable of a lot of modifications. It's very adaptable. You'll often find pamphlets sewn into other structures of books when you need just a little bit more information, or you need a little bit more density of page space or something like that. So keep this in mind. It's great for chapbooks, right? It's great for poetry books. It's also great as sort of little addenda to add into your otherwise folded structures. Like some of the 1-page books we've looked at as part of my collection have some of these pamphlets sewn in when you need additional information. So I'm going to show you these today in this video. I wanted to show you what materials you need for this process. So we have just my standard sort of side of the table bookbinding tools. I have a small pair of scissors, bone folders, cutting knife, pencil, and I also have an awl tonight. I have a little poker. I have the point protected with a cork so I don't get injured by it when it's traveling around. I also have a little piece of beeswax. I have these linen threads, bookbinding linen threads. These are all the same size. They're 18/3, which is what you also have to use in the studio. And so it's a fairly heavy weight, but it's nice for these decorative type of bindings where you actually see the threads. I have an eraser, I have some binder clips, and I have a bunch of needles here, but you will only have 1 needle. I have 1 needle for each of you. To store your needles, it's a good idea to make a little sort of envelope for your needle. I find that just even a piece of paper, right? This is a great way to one, not lose your needle, but to also keep it in your bookbinding kit and keep it protected from, keep yourself protected from stabbing yourself. So just make a little folder for your needle. I only got enough for everyone to have one needle for the semester, so try not to lose it. And then I have a bunch of paper that's ready to go. I have a ruler, a standard steel edge ruler, and a steel ruler and a triangle. Let's go ahead and get started. So these are, as I said, are pretty simple books, but they really benefit from a real accuracy in construction. So I'm gonna really try to focus on that as I'm constructing the books. And that will be something I'm looking for in grading. And I also think it adds a real, just for your own benefit, it adds a real layer of professionalism to have your books competently constructed, right? Not look like they are just crappily folded. They're all like cattywampus and stapled together, right? I'm going to show you how you can really make an elegant presentation, even if it is a simple book form. So that's what we'll really focus on in this video. So I'm going to show you 4 different structures, and then for your homework, I'm going to ask you to make 4 just basic sample books, the ones I'm showing you, and I'd like you to make 4 additional books. So they're the same binding techniques, but maybe you want to explore a different combination of covering technique with sewing technique. So, and you want to maybe explore a different size. I would love to see a different size, and maybe you want to explore some different sort of materials. We'll start the practice books with just very basic materials, which essentially would be copy paper and whatever kind of slightly heavier weight wrapper you can find. I would suggest the Mohawk heavier weight in the drawer that's available for you all. Okay, so we're going to start with our pieces of copy paper. Again, because these are just practice books, copy paper is perfectly legitimate. It's very, very thin. It's quite thin. It's maybe like a 35-pound weight paper. It's very, very thin. It's quite tender and floppy. But it does have a distinctive grain direction. Remember, this is where grain direction is really going to start being important. So I want you to test your grain direction. Grab some copy paper. I think you'll need 20 sheets of this copy paper, about 20 sheets of copy paper. Test for grain direction. See if you can feel it. I'm pretty sure I'm going to tell you the answer, but do test and see if you can feel it. Our grain direction is long on copy paper. So what I'd like you to do is we want the grain direction, right, parallel to the spine. And so we're going to cut all of these sheets of copy paper in half. And you can use the cut trimmer for this. It's really great for this. So there you go. We have our grain direction long. We're cutting in half so that all of our half sheets are going to have grain direction parallel to our spine. The cut trimmer is great for this. You don't have to cut sheets one at a time, right? When you're cutting something nice and thin like copy paper, I would suggest that you cut maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You could cut like 8 sheets at a time. Before you cut, this is important, and I forgot to have extra samples to show you. Before you cut, take your stack of paper and jog it up. Okay, so we haven't talked about jogging before because we haven't really used signatures. So essentially, jogging is when you have your stack of paper and the papers have been basically manufactured side by side, right? They've been shipped side by side. They kind of get stuck together a little bit. So what I want you to do is jog them up and get in the practice of always jogging your paper that you're going to use to make signatures. It's basically a way to just make sure all of our edges are aligned. So I hold it loosely in both hands, and then I kind of allow it. Essentially what I'm trying to do is get airspace, a little bit of airspace between each sheet, so they definitely can move independently. They're not still stuck together. But I'm also, with the sides of my hands here, like this little fleshy part of my palm, I'm kind of pushing them together while I'm dropping them against a level surface. So I'm basically getting the bottom edge all flush, and I'm sort of pushing these sides together to make a stack that is really nicely lined up, right? Nothing sticking out. There's no edges that are sticking out. And then I'm going to take my large piece of copy paper and cut in half. So I'm looking for 5.5 as my dimension, right, by 8.5, which is my given dimension. So I'm actually going to just trim this a little bit short. I have a cut trimmer right here in my studio. So if I disappear for a moment and then you hear the cut trimmer sound, that is where I've gone. Okay. So great. I am going to cut all of those 20 sheets in half, and then we'll use these as our signature, as the interior pages for all of our sample books. While you're working on the cut trimmer, I'd like you to also make your covering paper, your potential covering paper. So I did a job not too long ago where I used all this fluorescent orange paper, and I have a lot of it left over. Like I have about 450 large size sheets of this paper. And I think it is not great for everything, but it's a pretty decent paper. It's an okay color, and it's free. I have it in my studio. It's left over, so I brought a bunch into the studio. So you're welcome to use this. Remember to test your grain direction, right? You want your strips to have the grain direction going short, but the paper itself, the parent sheets, might have grain direction long. So figure that out. I have also left a few sheets of construction paper in the cabinet where all of your materials are, and those are 8.5 by 11. So you could take a couple of those sheets and cut them in half. That will give us flush cut covers. But actually most of the covers we'll want to make we'll need to have oversized paper, because remember, all that 8.5 by 11 paper is grain long. So it's not the correct grain direction for making our covers. So I would suggest you use some of this orange paper. It's totally fine. You could use also, it's nice if the cover stock is a little bit heavier weight than the interior stock. That gives it a little bit more, protection on the cover, and it gives it just a little bit more of a substantial feeling to have a heavier weight paper on the cover. So you could use either the off-white heavy stock that's in the drawer, or the white heavy stock that's in the drawer, and cut yourself some strips. A good practice is, I think, to cut it in half first, right? Tear it in half first with the paper knife so you have a more controllable size, and then cut yourself some strips. So the way we'll assemble these books is essentially from the inside out. So I like to just use slightly longer strips depending on whatever structure I'm going to, whatever binding style, cover style I'm going to use. So I've also made myself a number of covering potential strips, and this will become clear as you go through the video. So while the cutter is set on that 5.5, I'm also going to cut these covering materials, right? So everything is essentially the same height. All my grain direction is with the fold. Okay, so basically prep my materials. Okay, I'm going to move these to the side. Okay, and I'm going to start with the first pamphlet, the simplest pamphlet, which 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll make this out of 7 pages of copy paper. Put this on the side for later. And, oops. Oh, here we go. And I have this gray cardstock. Okay. So, as I alluded to before, when we're making these books, we're making out of what's called a signature. So a signature is a number of sheets of paper gathered together and folded together. You should never, when you're making a book with multiple page signatures, fold your sheets individually and then try to stack them together. The fold will never work properly, because essentially when you make a single, I can show you, when you make a single tight crease on a sheet of paper, and then all your papers have the same tight crease, and you try to nest them together, oh, it doesn't show with these two, you invariably have a little space between those 2 points. When you're putting together books with signatures, which are gatherings of folded pages, you want to do your folding all at one time, because these pages, you want them to nest comfortably together and sort of accommodate for each other and accommodate for each other's motions. So I want you to jog up, right? You're always jogging. So kind of push with your palm, top of your palm, and like tap lightly against the bottom surface, and then line up that cut edge, this open edge, the foredge of the book, thumb crease, and then use your bone folder to make a nice tight crease. And you'll see, if you look inside the fold, you'll see that the interior fold is really sharp, right? And this exterior fold is kind of rounded. It hugs the collection of pages. You'll also see that, I don't know if you can see this in the video exactly, but you will be able to see it on your own papers. You will see also that the foredge becomes kind of a triangle shape. Like if you look down at it, it's not perfectly flush, right? It's not perfectly square. And that's because, right, this interior page, because its crease is so tight and it's sitting on the inside of the other creases, it sticks out a little bit more, right? All that material gets displaced. It sticks out a little bit more. So we can always trim this off later. It's usually better to bind your book together and get everything established in like the position it's going to be forever. And then we can trim off that little ragged foredge if you want to make a nice flush and square foredge. So likewise, with your cover material, check your grain direction. That's correct, right? It's nice and wants to fold in the middle as opposed to the long way. You also do not want to fold this separately. You want to fold this so that it accommodates the round of the material that you're having it sit around. Sometimes it can be really awkward to fold like a stiffer sheet around this middle, right? It's hard to like get it centered. It's hard to get it to cooperate perfectly. So what I do sometimes is line this up so this foredge again is flush, and then I just give it like a really gentle little pinch top and bottom, right? This is still a very, very soft fold. It's barely even a fold, right? I'm just giving it a little indication for myself of like where the middle is because it's hard to know. And then you definitely see this, right? All these sheets started as 8.5 by 11. But when our cover sheet is wrapping around, we really have a significant gap on the outside, right, on the foredge, because those interior papers are nested and folded. So then I'm just going to make sure that my book is tucked into that crease, and I'm going to bone down that crease. Another thing I'm going to do at this point, and this is sort of for tidiness sake, my copy paper, when I cut it, ends up being a tiny bit bigger than my cover, which means it sticks out, which I really hate. To me, that's like it's like your unintentional like underwear sticking out or whatever. It's just like not really supposed to show. It's not showing in an intentional way. So I'm going to take this to the cut trimmer, and I'm just going to shave off a hair of this because I want my cover to be just a tiny bit bigger than my interior, so I don't see any of that paper sticking out. So I'm going to take it to the cut trimmer, and I'm just going to shave the tiniest bit off, and I'll bring it over and show you just how tiny it is. I'm thinking like a 32nd of an inch, right? Half of a 16th. Okay, it kind of looks like this when I shave it off. It's like this little tiny curly bit of paper. But I think, oops, not enough. Okay, I'm going to do that again. I'm going to shave off a tiny, tiny bit, and then we're going to move on. Okay, another tiny, tiny bit. Just the tiniest little hair. And make sure your text block, your signature is jogged up when you're cutting it. And I always put the spine, the fold, against the bottom, right? Against the ruler part. Okay. So, better. Okay, that's good. That's really nice. So my cover, I don't see anything. I'm not worried about the foredge. We're going to trim that later, but this looks really nice. The cover is just tiny, tiny bit, a tiny hair bigger than the interior. Great. Okay, we're going to trim the foredge once everything's sewn together. So, next steps are figuring out where our sewing holes should be. So again, because this is a really simple structure, it can be really elegant if it's professionally put together. It can also be, kind of sloppy if it's not really elegantly put together. So I have cut another piece of heavier weight paper that I'm going to use as a punching guide. And this punching guide is the same height as my text block and my interior paper. So I'm going to mark my holes where I'm going to put my holes on this piece of paper. I'm sorry about the reflection. So typically when you are sewing a book together and you have a cover and interior pages, you're going to offset in this case, I want my holes evenly spaced, my 3 holes evenly spaced. But I also want my holes to be a little bit offset because I want there to be clarity between what is the top and what is the tail. And if I get turned around somehow, it's definitely possible that can happen. There's a clear indication that I'm upside down, I'm going the wrong way before I actually start sewing. So typically, people will put their first hole at 3/8 from the top. We're going to call this head, right? Or top. That's the top of the book, the head or the top. The tail or the foot is down below. And then I'm going to put the bottom hole 1/2 inch from the bottom cut. So I have 3/8 of an inch measured, and I'm just marking a little line in pencil. Let me bring this up actually so you can see it. So I cannot see it. I don't know if you can see it, probably not. If we zoom in, oh, there we go. So I have 3/8 measured, a little line from the top or the head, and 1/2 an inch measured from the bottom. So these indicate my sewing station 1 and my sewing station 3, and I need to find the center point between those two. So I can do it by measuring. If I look at this with a ruler, I have 4 5/8 inches that I could find the center of. A trick that I like to show people, because I know measuring is not everybody's strong suit, is that you can also take a strip of paper. This is just a strip, an edge of copy paper that I tore off. And I'm going to line this up against my cutting jig, and I'm going to mark where my 2 holes are, right? One of them is just flush at the edge, and I've marked a little mark on the other. I'm going to fold this in half. I'm going to fold the edge to meet the mark, and then that's my center point. Okay, so I don't have to measure. I don't have to subdivide. I'm just going to mark that. Okay, so I now have, So I now have on my punching guide at the head, I have 3 marks, and my holes are all evenly distributed along my cutting guide. My punching guide. One thing I also like to do is cut myself tiny little triangles. And these are like truly tiny because I like to just have this little opening, this little gap that essentially, let me show you, I get my needle out. You know all these needles and there's only one. There it is. So I make this tiny little hole, and it basically is like just a little needle guide, right? Oh, and actually when I punch my holes, I'm not going to use the needle. I'm going to use my awl. So this little slot is just like a guide for my awl. You know, if I just have a line in pencil, it's easy to miss it, right? To aim and not really get to the right point. But I have this just like tiny little V. It really helps guide the needle and makes it more accurate. Okay, so I have my punching guide, and I have my signature and my cover. So I'm going to go ahead and punch my holes. So in order to do that, I am going to open my signature to the middle. I'm going to center, remember this is the head, and I can use this either direction, right? It doesn't matter, but I do want to remember which is the top and which is the bottom. So opening my signature, I put my punching guide right in the middle there. I'm going to line it up flush with the bottom. And then I push this punching guide right up against that middle crease. And the top of the paper almost comes up. So it's like a 90-degree angle. That's good. What I want to do then with my awl is I want to punch it through. I want to hold my awl at exactly 45 degrees so that it punches through the middle of the signature, like right on the crease, and it comes out the back right on the crease. Okay, so that's my goal, and that could take a little practice to get right. You don't have to make a huge hole at first. As long as you have a guide, you can come back and enlarge that hole so you can see it and you can use it. Okay, so now I'm going to punch my cover, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to push this right up against the cover. I'm going to line it up flush with the bottom, and I'm just going to punch right through. I'm going to use those little grooves, punch right through. Okay, done with the awl for now. Oh no, I'm going to enlarge these two. So they're quite tiny at first, and this one's like a little bit off center actually. No, they're kind of crooked. Right, can you see how one of these is a little bit towards me? That one's nicely centered, and this one's like a little bit more towards this direction away from me. That's not great, honestly. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do it again and see if I get different results. And then, not really. we'll sew together and see what happens. Okay, we use this punching guide again. I'll just put it on the side. Put my signature inside the book. Make sure the holes are lining up. They are. Okay, and now I'm going to get my thread ready. So I think I'm going to sew this with black. And the threads that I got for the class are nice threads. They're Irish linen. They're dyed Irish linen. And so you're welcome, you're welcome to use what you need, but I would say in order to avoid wasting just off the bat, each of these books has a measurement that is related to like the amount of thread you actually need. For these books, I would measure 1, 2, 3 lengths of the spine, and that will be absolutely plenty. We actually need just under 2 lengths of the spine to sew, and then you'll have a little bit extra for handling, and that should be plenty. It's not really advantageous to use like a big giant thread because it tangles, it gets worn, things happen as it pulls through the book. And so I would say just use for each of these structures what you need for the structure. Okay, so this is not wax thread, but I encourage you to wax it. So take a little plug of beeswax and you just want to run the thread pretty gently through the surface. I pinch it with my finger and pull it through, and then I flip it around and do the same thing for the other side, maybe 3 or 4 times. You're not trying to cut through the beeswax. You're just trying to get a nice coating of beeswax on the thread, and you'll feel a difference. Like it feels a little bit sticky, and you can, and it makes that like nice kind of sticky sound. The advantage of using beeswax on this thread is that the thread kind of sticks to itself as you're sewing, and it helps keep your tension adjusted. So it means it helps keep your sewing tight and not all floppy. So it's really helpful. Threads also come already waxed, but they're often like so sticky and junky. It's too much wax and you have to strip some off. So I prefer waxing it myself. Okay, you take your needle. Sometimes I bite the end to give myself a little flat spot. And thread your needle. And then I just make a little extra tail of like a couple of inches and fold it over. So we're gonna sew with a single thickness of thread. Okay, now we're ready to sew. So with the pamphlets, this is true with the 3-hole, the 5-hole, and the double. Where you start determines where your knot is going to be. So we can decide if we want a knot on the inside or on the outside. And I am going to show you both, but for now, why don't we say knot on the outside? Okay, so I've got my books together. Sorry, my cover and my spine together. Cover and my signature. Okay, so I'm going to go from the outside in, and you might need to work your needle through a little bit, right? It's usually the eye of the needle has the doubled portion of thread, and that sometimes can be a little tricky to get through all at once. But I always forget, if it helps you, you can also, once you have your cover and your pages put together, you could kind of pinch them together with these binder clips. That is sometimes really nice to hold everything together so you don't have to stress out about also doing that with your hands. You want to have them open and pinch with binder clips. So we're going to leave a tail sticking out, a little, maybe 3 inches of tail. And then we're just going to go, it doesn't matter. We can go to either hole. We're going to skip this span, go to either hole, and hold on to the tail or else the whole thing will just pull through. And then we're going to go back to the outside. We're going to skip that outside span and go into the 3rd sewing station, the one that we haven't yet used. Okay, so you essentially will have, as soon as I get this through. So I kind of make the needle work in a circle to sort of work it through that hole. So now we'll have the tail sticking out, and we have one span that goes like from head to tail of our book. The inside looks like this. And we're going to come out through that center hole. And it's really important to try not to split the thread that's already there. So we want to try to emerge on the side of that thread, not right through it. If we split the thread, It basically means we can't adjust the tension because we've made a knot. Okay, so I'm going to remove the needle now. And I have my interior pretty loose, okay? And I have my exterior also pretty loose. So I want to snug up my tension. To do that, I'm going to pull parallel to the spine. That's really important. If you pull perpendicular to the spine, you could tear your pages, right? They're not that sturdy. So if you pull parallel to the spine, you're basically just pulling on the thread and not the actual paper, okay? So I want this to be nice and snug in the middle. I don't want it to be loose or gappy. Okay, I'm actually going to remove these now so I can just let things shift around if they need to. Okay, and this is also really important. This large span is in the middle of my two threads. I want to tie them around this span to try to keep it, try to keep it a little less floppy. So I'm just going to tie a nice square knot. So I'm going to do one end over the other, make a little square knot, and then I'm going to do another one. Pull it nice and snug, again, parallel to the spine. And I can use my bone folder to smash it down a little. And then I'm going to trim off the little tails. I'm not going to trim them too tight, too close to the actual knot, because it can sometimes work its way undone. So then I'm going to use my bone folder to kind of encourage the spine to have a nice shape. I'm going to kind of tuck in my knot. I'm going to fold back any of the splayed out paper that kind of came open as I was sewing. Okay, and then I'm going to look at my foredge, and it's a little bit messy looking, right? Because I have that sort of triangular shape of the page edges, and my cover is a little bit shy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this to the cut trimmer, and I'm basically going to cut as little off as possible, but I'm just going to cut straight down through the whole thing when the book is closed. So that will give me like a nice flush top and bottom and a nice flush foredge. So I'm going to do that. And voila. Okay, first pamphlet done. If you wanted to have a little bit of a foredge, like if you wanted your thumb to be able to just grasp the covers a little bit and not have it super flat, you could fold this cover back. I'm going to show you this too. Fold this cover back out of the way, and then when the book is closed, shave a tiny bit off this foredge. I'm actually going to do that. It is my preference to have just a tiny, tiny little lip sticking out for your thumbs to grab onto as you're handling a book. But just a tiny little one. There's something really nice about giving indications to your viewers that your hands notice, but that your eyes don't necessarily. Like, I think there's something very elegant about that. So my thumb, right, can just grab these very easily, but visually I still have a nice, like, it's really just a tiny hair bigger, right? But my thumbs can use to open this book and to flip through. Okay, so that looks nice. I'm going to press this under weight for, I would say, overnight. I'm just going to put a board and a brick on the top. And this kind of like gapping in the middle should really get nice and flat, take care of itself. I'll do that and bring these in to show you so that you can see how nice that's going to be when it's all nice and flattened. Okay, so we've done our book number 1. Let's move on to the 5-hole pamphlet with a foredge turn-in. So let's use the same stack of paper here. Oops, not that guy. 3, 4, 5, oops, 6, 7. Let's use 7 sheets. So typically you want to use between 4 and 8 sheets for your pamphlet. This paper is really thin, so you can almost get to that 8 sheet maximum. Let's use 7 here. And then let's use one of these nice orange sheets for our foredge turn-in. Okay, so I'm going to jog this, fold it, right? I'm looking for that little stair-step situation. It's natural, right? It will happen. There's no way you can avoid it. Okay, jog it all up, try to line it up as neatly as possible, as accurately as possible. Okay, bone it down. Okay, there's our text block. And I see on this text block, I don't know if you can see this, my interior pages are a little bit bigger. So I am going to shave this down a tiny hair before we do our sewing. Okay, let's back up a little here. And I'm going to use that same trick as before. It's especially difficult when you have a long paper. And I'm not measuring this. This is just the sort of given length of the sheet. I'm just going to rely on trimming this to size after things are sewn together. Okay, so I'm just going to find the middle by giving myself really gentle little pinches, right? So it's not really a fold in the middle. It's just an indication. I'm going to trim this right now. Trim these sheets just this hair shorter. And again, it's really just the tiniest hair. Like I'm just shaving off a little bit so that this can sit within this fold here and not stick out. Okay, so I have my pages tucked in. Kind of jog it to the fold there. You can flip it open and kind of push this paper back against that crease. Make sure your cover is still square, right? That like our cover is gonna sit nicely, and then we can still bone down. Like we still want to really establish that crease. We just don't want it to be very, very tight. We want it to be nicely wrapped around and hugging our interior material. Okay, that looks great. So this is a 5-hole pamphlet. I'm going to revisit this punching guide. And now I'm going to make this 5 holes. So for pamphlets, actually, you could do any, I usually like to do an odd number of holes. If I wanted to add 2 more, center some holes here, of course, I could measure this. It's 2 1/4, so it would be easy enough, right? It's 1 1/8. Also, if my measurements weren't quite as simply divided, I can also take this original paper, right? From here to here is the measurement between my my sewing station number 1 and my sewing station number 3. I could take this and just fold it one more time. And then I would have an indication of where the center point is between these holes. So again, it depends on your measurements. It depends if you're a ruler person or not a ruler person, but these are different options just for getting your measurements figured out. In bookbinding, actually, there's a lot of sort of measuring you do off an existing structure, existing shape, and existing measurement. So you can use an object to measure its covering, for instance, which is in a way a lot more accurate than using a ruler to figure out the number and then transferring that number. So I like to do whatever is accurate and easy. So I have made a 5-hole punching guide. I could still use this as a 3-hole punching guide, right? I would just use my 3 holes. I would not use these 2, but I'm going to use all 5 for now. Okay? So same thing. Find the middle. All right. Okay. So we find the middle here, and I'm going to put this guy, the cover, out of the way. I'm going to find the middle, and I'm not going to center this. I am going to line it up against the bottom. If you center it and then you also try to center your cover, right, if they're not quite the same size, it's a little bit inaccurate because you don't necessarily center it the same way both times. So I think it's more accurate to line it up flush with one of your ends, either the head or the tail. So remember, I'm going to push this right against that crease, and then I'm going to use my punching tool at a 45-degree angle to try to get through the crease on the inside and come out at the crease in the back. Pretty good, not bad. Okay, and then I'm going to enlarge my hole a little bit before I move forward. I did some samples before recording the video, and I was being driven crazy by my sewing needle not wanting to get through the holes. Okay, And then we're going to punch the cover. Punch the cover separately. Again, we're going to line this up, and this lines up. See, this lines up really nicely with our cover, which is good. And we've lined it up flush with the bottom. So our text block and our cover, our text block and our cover, what's happened here? Oh no, we're okay. Our text block and our cover, sorry, I thought my computer froze, will line up together flush at the bottom, and we might have a little tiny gap at the head, but that's okay. Whoops, and this paper is a lot easier to punch through. Okay, great. So we've got our two materials here. I'm gonna line these up, and then we can give it the little clamp, if that helps. Oops. Sometimes if you want to try to find, like, line up the front and the back, you can reach through with your needle. Use this as like a little, use it as like a little gauge, kind of, a little finder. I'm sort of gently probing. So what I could do is go through here and then go through here. See how they line up? So we do have quite a bit of a foredge there. Okay, so we're gonna line those up. Right, because my punching guide, I lined up with the tail of both of these. Okay, then we're gonna do our thread. What do you think? Red? It's beautiful. Okay, so same thing. We need one, two, 3 lengths of thread. That will be plenty. We're gonna cut at 3. Storing this thread, I feel like a good way to do that is to wrap up whatever extra is hanging about, and then just get a tiny piece of tape and tape down that edge, just so it doesn't like wildly unravel and make a huge mess, and also get worn in the bin, in the storage bin. Okay, so I take the thread about halfway, run it through the wax 3 or 4 times to get it nice and sticky. Okay, and then let me see, I'm going to back up a little bit here to get better focus. Use the same needle, and again, I sometimes pinch this, or I sometimes bite it a little bit to just flatten that end so it can tuck right through. And then same deal. We're going to use a little tail, just fold it over, and then we're going to use a single thickness of thread. So this time, let's put our knot on the inside. And this is true for whatever odd hole pamphlet that you sew. You always want to start in the middle, central hole. So knot is on the inside, so we're starting on the inside. Okay, so leave a little tail. Okay, I'm holding on to the tail inside the book. And then I'm going to go either direction. It doesn't matter, but I'm going to my next sewing station, my next hole over. Try to be gentle. So the problem if your holes are not big enough for your needle and thread to comfortably fit is you sometimes can kind of damage the book if you're really wrenching on it to try to get that needle through. So I would say, sort of support the hole as you're pulling through, and then kind of try to work that needle and thread through so you don't damage the book. So we went from the middle and then in and out, and now I'm going to hold on to this tail with my hand and snug it up. So I'm adjusting my tension. I don't want it baggy, saggy. I want everything nice and snug. Okay. And now I'm going to go back into the book again. So I just skip this one span, or don't skip it. I just go into the next hole available, and I'm going to try, really carefully to not split my thread. So I'm again going to try to go on the side of that thread rather than right on top of it, but in the same hole. And then I'm going to snug that tightly. So what I have so far is on the outside, I have my 2 spans, and then I have my center span, or my center tail. And I pulled too tightly, so I almost pulled it through. That's okay. I didn't lose it all. And if you do, it's fine. You know what you can do is you can just resew. You can use the same thread, pull everything out, and start over. So I'm going to snug this up by pulling parallel to my spine. I'm going to skip these middle 2 spans and enter in here. So you can maybe, this is familiar, right? This is just what we did the first time. So we just added an extra loop on the outside. Okay, and this is a little loose right now, but that's okay because it's attached to my initial tail, and we'll tighten that up before we tie our knot and finish the book. Okay. Okay, the end piece, snug it by pulling parallel to the spine. Come back in the span, okay, on the side of the thread, not right on top of it or through it. Okay. And then we can kind of straighten these out later as we need to. And then we're going to go back in through the middle, and this should be familiar. We're going to try and go on the other side of that large span. Snug up, make sure all of my little loops, links are snug, and kind of try to shift things over a little bit, tidy them up so that this looks like a straight line instead of kind of wonky. And then I'm going to take my needle off, and I'm going to tie that square knot again. So I do one loop over the other loop, boop, pull it nice and snug. You don't want it to be too bulky. And then another one. Okay, and then I like to use the bone folder to kind of compress that knot a little bit, because it honestly it does get a little bit bulky in there because our thread is pretty thick. Okay, and then I'm going to cut off the tail, boop, boop, not too close, remove my clips, and then we're going to work on our cover. So I like to, as soon as I get my book assembled, I like to fold it and then kind of re-establish that fold with the thread in place. And I also like to run over the back with my bone folder and kind of try to close up some of these openings, the sewing stations, in case the paper got kind of splayed out or messy. And tuck those into place. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so we're making a book with a 4-edge turn-in this time. And I think the first thing we should do is actually trim our interior paper. So, you know, they'll always have this little triangle on the 4-edge. So I'm just going to shave that off so I have a flush 4-edge for the signature. Oops. Okay, so that's nice and straight. And then I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to determine the edge of my turn-in. So I'm sticking the ruler out just a hair, I would say a 1/16 of an inch or less. So I can just barely see the edge of my ruler sticking out, and it's parallel to the edge of my paper. And I'm holding down the spine of the book because it's still a little puffy, right? I haven't weighted it yet. So I'm going to hold this down with my left hand and then give myself a little score mark and then fold this over. Okay. And so then I'm going to fold this over. It's definitely too long still, okay, but I'm not worried about that. I'm going to cut it off. And then you can see that we need this turn-in to stop, like before we hit the spine of the book. So I'm just going to eyeball it. I have a little scissor, and I'm just going to cut the inside part. And I'm going to stop about, I don't know, a 1/2 inch from my spine. If your turn-in is too small, it's going to flap out, like it's never going to sit down comfortably. And if your turn-in flap goes too close to your spine, it's also going to interfere with the closing of the book. So I like to give just a little leeway. And then here's my little cut, right? There's my little cut. So I'm going to use my square and my knife to make just my little nice turn-in. So this to me is pretty nice. My little square is pretty good. It's not too big. And this doubled paper really does help add a little bit of durability to my paper. You know, we could also stick a little tape in here if we didn't want this to be so floppy. And I'm putting the tape closer actually to the fold than to the open edge, and that's because I think it just holds together better that way. So, you know, you could also just put a little piece of tape in there, and that helps hold things and keep things a little bit better behaved. Also, once you press this, it's gonna sit a lot more flat and a lot more comfortably. So same thing on the other side. So I have my one turn-in page, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing on this side. So I'm going to hold the book flat with my left hand and just have a tiny little parallel turn-in, about a 1/16 of an inch emerging, right? The edge of the ruler, the score against this edge of the ruler, and fold this in, make sure it's parallel, right? Make sure those edges are flush. Establish my crease. Cut about, you guys can see this, like 1/2 inch from my spine, giving myself a nice long flap. And then trim this. Trim that off. These could be used, you know, these would be useful actually as punching guides. Okay, so there we have it. Pretty nice. Okay, and again, I'm going to put this with my last book I made. I'm going to put them spine away from each other, press them overnight. Okay, oops, we made 3. Okay, great. Forge turn-in. Did we do the 5-hole? Yes, we did the 5-hole turn-in. Okay, so let's do this double. Let's do the double pamphlet with a wrapper this time. Okay, so the double pamphlet is you're going to need 2 signatures, right? So you're going to need 2 sections of, let's say, 6 pages each, just to start with. They don't have to be too flappy, but we're still adding some bulk, right? By virtue of using 2 signatures. And let's do orange again because we have a lot of it. Okay, so what we're going to do here is jog our papers. Jog our papers. A nice crease, thumb crease, and bone it. And if you get the chance, it's actually a really good idea to fold your signatures and then press them before you actually bind them. That helps too, because right now these are quite puffy. So anything you can do to sort of exert a little control over the materiality of your paper is great. So we have our 2 signatures, 6 pages each, and then this is going to be our cover paper. So we're going to fold this in half, and this time we're going to hard crease it. Okay, I'm going to hard crease this. And then this is going to become, actually that hard crease is going to become this little tab that separates our 2 signatures. So we're going to hard crease that, and then we're going to mark 1/2 inch away from that crease. Okay, so 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. And then I'm just going to draw a pretty light pencil line along that. Great. Okay. And then I'm going to punch my holes, and we're going to do this as we're going to do it as a 3-hole or a 5-hole. Let's do it as a 3-hole. So the reason you would sometimes have a 3-hole signature versus a 5-hole versus a 9-hole is really based on the height of your book, the height of your material. 3-hole is the sort of minimum signature. So if this is 5.5, if it's this or like 3 inches or something, you would always have a 3. If you're doing a book that is, say, 11 inches, like I regularly make these journals that are 9 inches tall, and I usually do a 7-hole pamphlet, because I don't want too much of a gap or a span. The more locations for attachment you have, in a way, the sturdier the book, but also the slower the production. So in this case, I might do like a 7 or a 9 hole, and you maybe want between like 1 and 2 inches between your sewing holes. So if your sewing holes are equidistant along here, and you can fit 7 on there, that's great. This I think would be too big for a 3 hole, right? Because think about this, you would have like 4.5 inches in between each hole, which doesn't give you a lot of attachment points or strength. So this will do 3. This is going to be fine for 3. Okay. So I'm going to use my, I've lost it. No, here it is. My same punching guide. And it has the 5 holes on, but I'm just going to use 3 of the holes. Okay. So I'm going to punch the signatures as normal. All my tools get like outside my little container. So I'm going to try to keep them tidy. Okay, there we go. So good height. And we're just going to, remember, we're just doing the 3. So we're going to do the middle and the 2 ends, and then after I've punched those holes, I'm gonna just use my awl and enlarge them a little bit so I can so I don't have to fight when I'm doing the sewing. And find the middle, open that up, and we're again not doing all 5, we're just doing the 3. Okay. Great. Okay, and then this is kind of weird, but this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna punch, again, those 3 holes, those 3 little locations, but we're gonna go straight down through this paper on the line. Okay, so can you guys see that? Let me zoom in a little. So I have my top hole here on the line, my middle sewing station, and my end sewing station. Okay. And then why don't we use blue this time? Okay, we'll use blue this time. Okay, and so we will need, this is the same, even though we have all these materials we're sticking together, it's still the same pattern, sewing pattern. So we'll need 1, 2, 3 lengths of thread only. Oops. Okay, so we've got the blue, and we're going to back up a little bit. Oops. Oops. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Okay, so we just run it through the wax, get it nice and sticky. Okay, and then find our needle. Oops. If you have a ragged end from your cutting, I just check the other end and see if it's any better from the bad scissors. Okay, bite the end to flatten it. There we go. Blech. Okay, there we go. Okay, great. So we leave a little tail. Same. We're going to sew a single length of thread. Now this, I do feel like this sewing takes a little bit of trust. It seems so weird, but you just have to trust in the process, and it will work out in the end. So we sort of make this inside out. Okay, so it's a 3-hole pamphlet. We're gonna start, we want our knot to be on the inside in this case. So I'm gonna hold these together like so, where we have 1 pamphlet. Make sure your holes line up on either side of this folded span. So we're going to start in the middle of one of the pamphlets. It doesn't matter. And you could clip these also if you want. If that helps you could clip them. I'm just going to hold it because I feel like this one things tend to shift around, and I trust it. And I'm going to leave a tail and hold on to it with my thumb. And then I'm going to go through the middle hole of this flat sheet. And then I'm going to go through the middle hole of the other signature. And again, if it gets a little out of whack or hard to find that hole, you can always go back through from the other side to just kind of get everyone lined up. If you can't find it, because the paper is really fragile, this copy paper. So it's very easy to tear it or make it extra holes with your needle, which you don't really want to do. Okay. And once you have things sort of lined up, it'll start behaving itself a little better. I'm still holding on with my thumb because I don't want everything to just cut loose. Okay, Now I'm going to go to a next hole. Doesn't matter which way. I could go either way. I've chosen this hole on the right because that seems easier to me. I'm holding on with my thumb so the thread does not slip through. I go through the signature first, then the cover. This is the cover. And then through the other signature. And again, I'm going to just go through from the inside to make sure everything's lined up. And then I'm going to be able to hit all those marks on the way through. Okay. Kind of wiggle this, but gently. I don't want to tear anything out. Okay. Once we get this first span, things should start behaving a little bit better. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to skip these two spans. We're going to leap all the way to this far hole. If you can get through everything at one time, that's really great. If things are not quite in alignment yet, that's fine too. Just do what you can. Take it easy. Take it slow. You don't want to tear your paper. You want to be accurate. Okay, there we go. Great. Good. So now I'm not holding on anymore because we've done enough loops that things are really holding in position. So I'm going to snug. I'm going to pull this against, right, parallel with my fold. And then, as usual, I'm going to come back through the middle here. Don't split your threads. Come back through the middle for my final. Okay, I'm going to take the needle off. For my final adjustment, okay, I'm going to check this span. Pretty snug, that's good. Pretty snug. I'm going to just snug up a little bit more before I tie my knot. Parallel to the spine, remember. Really pull it. And then I'm going to tie the first part of my knot. Okay, and then the second part. Loop and go under. Okay, and then make another, like a knot in your sneaker lace, you know. Okay, squish that guy down, cut off my little ends, and then we're gonna, oops, okay. We're gonna turn it into an actual book. So we'll fold our signatures over and bone them down. Okay, fold them out. So we fold them so that that tab is in between the two of them. And then we could come around here and we sort of want to fold this cover over. And I know in this case we have like plenty of extra. For samples it's tricky. Sometimes I like to just leave extra and then, you know, trim off once I decide what kind of cover I want to make. And again, I do it not by measuring with numbers, but by measuring against the book itself, which to me is more accurate procedure. Okay, so I do kind of want to crease this against the pages themselves. I don't want it to be gappy, but I do want to kind of work these folds against the actual book. So I'm going to try to make like a nice rounded crease, but an accurate crease. So I don't want it to be. And it's not that fragile really, you know. The paper is fragile, like it's susceptible to tears. But when you're trying to just roll it around and crease it, you can give it a little force. Okay, there we go. You gotta know how to mold it into position. Force it to behave. Okay. And if you for somehow got this grain wrong, you'll really be seeing it. You'll be seeing lots of like creasing and breaking and like an unwillingness to fold around the spine nicely. Okay, so that looks good. What we were going to do with this one was to make a flush cut cover and then make the back sort of wrap around and tuck in. Right? I think we were. Okay. So for our flush cut cover, how are we going to do that? I think what a good thing to do would be maybe to fold back the back cover. So this is our back cover. I think what a good thing to do would be to take this over to the cut trimmer and cut off just a little bit of this edge and also the cover along with it, and then leave a longer span, at least double, to wrap around and then fold onto that front cover. So the back cover is out of the way. folded open, and I'm just going to give myself a nice, tidy, clean cut through that foredge, right? So I have a nice, tidy foredge and through the cover piece as well. So far, so good. Okay, and so now I'm still going to sort of push this into behavior. I want this cover to be, I want the spine to be 90 degrees when I'm making my cover around it. So I want it to be nice and square. So I'm just going to hand crease this and fold around. I feel like that foredge is a little bit fragile. I don't really want the bone folder to be mushing things around. Unfortunately, I have a little paper sticking out the bottom. I kind of hate that. You know I hate that. It means my paper is just a little bit big. And I want to try to fix it, but I also am worried that the fix is more difficult than just leaving it the way it is, because in order to fix it, I would have to cut this paper without cutting the cover. And I know how difficult that can be. You can sometimes get these weird little points when you cut like a folded area. I'm just going to leave it. It annoys me, but I'm just going to leave it. Okay. So now we're going to try to make our turn in, our edge. And there are a number of ways to do this. I just experimented with one before making the video. Oops, I don't know where it went. That seemed to work pretty well. So I'll try to kind of replicate this. And proportionally, it seems kind of attractive. Like I made this opening cut in the center, right? It's centered on the cover. And then I made this sort of envelope flap. I don't know, it was just kind of random, but tried to make it look deliberate and, symmetrical. So what are we going to do here? This is our flap. This is our flap that comes in. So I want it to be a little bit shorter than the book itself. It looks like it was a 1/2 inch shorter than the book. So what we could do is we could give ourselves first this edge. So this ruler I'm putting under here, and it's just giving me the exact edge of the book itself. So I definitely don't want to cut the book here, right? I'm only cutting this paper underneath. So this goes right full around to the actual spine. So I'm going to cut a 1/2 inch of this off. I don't, as I said before, I don't want whatever my cover is doing to come right up against the mechanism of the spine, because it interferes. It interferes with the way the spine is able to close and not close. Ooh, I'm looking for my pencil and I don't see it. There it is. Okay. So I'm just going to cut off a 1/2 inch here. Okay, so that my edges are not going, so that my cut flap is not going to interfere with my spine. Okay. There we go. Okay. And now I have this flap. It's not an envelope flap yet, it's just a flap. So I'm going to make my envelope shape. And again, we have a 5.5 inch. Half of 5.5 is 2 3/4, right? So I think I'm going to mark that 2 3/4, and then I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch from either side, giving myself a 1 inch centered mark. And then just to see, that is so 2 1/4 from my edges. So if we went 2 1/4 in, that would be a very squarish flap. And I think proportionally it wouldn't be so beautiful. So I think I want a longer flap. So I'm going to just mark it at 3 inches, because that gives me just a little bit on the edge. And I'm on the inside of the cover now. I think it's better when possible to do all your markings on the inside, so that if you forget to erase or if things get smudgy, it's usually not so visible. So now I'm just connecting those 2 marks to give myself a sort of nice envelope flap type shape. Okay, that seems fine. And again, you could do whatever you want. This is you. You could make a curved one, you could make a square one, you could make like long skinny tab, whatever you want to do. Okay. And then I need to figure out how to make my little slot, right? So I think what I did before, I like what I did before, which is where I found the center point. Sorry, I found the center point on the cover. And then I used the flap itself to mark where those openings should be, and then where the opening should start and finish, and then I open the book to cut it. So I do need to find on this front cover, so my book is 4 1/4, halfway, and it doesn't have to be halfway. You can do what you want, is 2 1/8, 2 1/8. So I'm gonna mark this, and I'm definitely using light pencil that I know can be erased, right? So I'm not going to draw this line because I don't really have to. I just want to see where these meet each other. So I'm making sure this is folded in, making a little pencil mark right at that little opening. And then I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to use my awl to just make a hole right where I made those lines. Oh, sorry, where I made those marks. And I'm going to erase my cover. I'm going to turn this over. And I can still see those little holes, right? So I'm going to make sure my knife has a fresh blade because I don't want to mess around with this. I've already done all this sewing and fitting, and I want this to be like a nice cut. I only want to have to do it once. I don't want it to be all hairy and weird. And then I'm just going to shift the ruler over this the tiniest little bit because to accommodate for the thickness of the paper, right? This paper has a thickness. So I'm just going to cut out, look at that, this tiny, tiny little like hair of paper so that this flap can just easily tuck right in there. Woo, that looks good. And this is interesting. This is something to experiment with because I think the closer you get to the end of the flap, the less holdability there is. And then the closer you get to out here, right, the longer your opening is, and so the more likely it's going to be to tear out. So it's useful to kind of experiment with the mechanics of this. And it will also be interesting to flatten this overnight and see how much more relaxed this gets. Because right now it's still kind of poochy, you know, it's resisting. It's resisting holding flat. Okay, so great. I'm going to put this again under weights, bring it and show you. Okay, last book. Oh my gosh. Okay, so our last book, let's just use the same gray paper again. We'll use a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, I have 8. I may as well use them. Okay, same deal. We're going to jog up our sheets. Get that nice point going on. Okay, crease through the middle. Okay, and then our outer sheet, same deal, right? We want to give it its gentle crease so we can center our book in there. Okay, and then we want to wrap around nicely. Okay, that looks good. Great. Great. So this last one I'm going to show you is, let's see, where's my sample? Oops, I really make a lot of these little books. There it is, okay. Is the chain stitch. Now this is a really nice decorative stitch. In this case, you definitely want your thread showing. It's decorative on the outside, and on the inside, it's pretty nice and plain. So this is a really nice, you know, a little bit fancier, acknowledges the sort of labor of the making of the book. And this is a sort of default, but I actually think the chain needs relatively close together holes in order to see the pattern developing. You know, if you have a much longer book, a much taller book than our 5.5 inches, maybe you would want fewer holes. But I actually think this with 1/2 inch between all of our holes looks really beautiful. I think that looks really nice. It looks nice on a taller book, and it looks nice on a smaller book too, because it gives you enough of a repetition to be able to really develop the pattern. Okay, so when I punch this, I could make a jig. I could make a punching guide. Because these are half inch away from each other, I'm just going to use a ruler in here as my punching guide, because I don't want to have to, I don't know, I could make a guide, but instead I'm going to just leave a half an inch, and I don't need to sort of subdivide in a complicated manner. All I need to do is take my time, give myself a little gap between the actual spine and the ruler, depending on the thickness of your ruler. So again, your goal here is going in the crease and coming out the crease, right? So I'm poking in at a 45-degree angle, right? I'm holding the paper sort of at a 90-degree angle and then poking in at like a 45, so that I get right through the front crease, right out through the back crease. And then I'm just going to take my time. Again, you could use the clips. You could use the binder clips to hold everything together, just so it doesn't slide against you. And then I'm just going to work this all through these holes to enlarge them a little bit, so that sewing won't be such a fight with this book. And then this one, I guess, is just going to be another flush cut. Okay, oops. And try not to crease your book or damage it as you're drilling these holes through. Okay. Looks good. Oops. Well, that one's a little wonky. Okay, there we go. All right, let's use the red again. That's really lovely. This plum color. Okay, this book's a little different in that you can see from this pattern, right, that it's doubled, and then there's also a length on the inside. So in this case, let's do 4 lengths of thread. So measure 1, 2, 3, 4. And the 4th is, again, like it's the extra, right, for the tails and for holding on to your holding onto the tail, and then tying your knots and things like that, and the loop for your needle. If your thread is exactly the length of the book, is exactly the length that you need, you won't have enough to hold onto it with your needle. So you do want to always do a little bit extra, but again, you don't have to do too much. Just enough. Okay, so let's find our needle. Where is it? Somewhere here. Here we go. So the reason I also leave thread in the back of my needle is so I can see it more easily too. So you see on my little thread packet, most of my needles still have thread sticking out the back, and it's just because I feel like they're less easy to lose if they have like a little flag attached to them. Oops, okay. The threading of the needle. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So a little tail. We're going to use the single span of thread. Let me grab some water. Okay, so for this book, it is kind of a different structure actually, in terms of we're not going to repeat the same patterns that I have showed you already for the 3-hole, 5-hole, and double pamphlet. In this case, we always start on the inside at one end. And let me see if I can remember this. I think that the end that we start on is the flat end. So then the subsequent threads loop up around. So it depends if you want your book to have, upward or downward facing loops, or if you even care. So we're going to start from the inside at one end. Just hold on to this little tail. And then we're just going to enter the book right next door. Okay. And we're going to pull that snug. And we're going to tie a little knot on the inside here. And I'm going to do the same as usual, the same little granny knot that I like to tie. And I'm just going to snug it up, make sure it's nice and snug. Okay, and then this little knot, I like to push to the outer end Okay, so I'm going to flatten this down. I'm going to cut this off. Not too close, but also not so long that the tail sticks out the end of the book. And then I'm going to go back through this outside. So it's kind of weird, right? The inside just has a single layer with the knot pushed toward the end of the book. And then I'm going to double this, and I'm going to go back in. And at this point, this is the visible part of the sewing. So I would say, like, be cognizant of how the threads are lining up next to each other. Oh, my computer is on the fritz. Okay. How the threads are lining up next to each other. I always like them to be side by side as opposed to overlapping each other. So I think it just makes the stitch look really nice and tidy if they're side by side. And then we're going to come out the next hole. So we have a little gap here. Pull taut, and then I'm going to just bring my needle underneath these two. Pull snug, and then go back in the same hole. So this is the pattern that we're developing. And again, I like these to be next to each other as opposed to overlapping. And then I'm going to come out the next step. And because there's so much looping and overlapping in this book, you really do want to try to keep your threads all snugged up. There isn't really an opportunity at the end to come back through and snug everything up, because it really is a cumulative attention to tautness that makes this a really nice book. So every step of the way, I'm going to take this off. It's kind of getting in the way of my sewing. Every step of the way, I'm just going to give an extra little snug up to make sure that my thread is nice and tight, and these are tight, not loose and gappy. Just tuck underneath. And then at this point too, I give a little tug, right, to make sure this straightens up and is nice and snug. Snug it. Again, always pull parallel to the spine, and then you have your pattern developing. It looks so beautiful. Snug it, go under, and I'm trying to really do the same thing. I want these loops to look as similar as possible. So I'm always coming around from the same side. Snug it. Okay. Snug it. Snug it. And remember, you don't want to pull, you want to pull parallel to the spine. Though in this case, the thread's providing some nice stability to sort of snug around. Looking so good. Okay. But it's really important in all bookbinding to just be cognizant of your of the tension of the thread. You don't ever want it to be so tight that it's tearing your book, but you always want it to be sort of under a nice tension. Like, you want it to be doing its job. You want it to be taut and strong, holding your book together. Okay, so always coming the same way. Just tuck under both of those. Boop, snug it. Okay, last one. We'll do the same thing. Don't get panicky. Okay, so we're at the last loop. And we go right back in. Okay, looks good. And this one's overlapping a little, so I'm just gonna mush these around a little bit, get them in line. Ooh, that looks great. Okay, and so tying off, we're gonna use what's called a half hitch. I'm gonna zoom in. And so we have our thread and our next door loop. We're gonna bring our needle underneath that loop until we have a little loop that's created. And we're gonna go through the loop and pull up, and you can see that there's a really nice little linking loop, and if you pull up, then it kind of arranges itself right at that end knot there. We're going to do a double half hitch. We're going to do 2 of those, and then we're going to cut off our little tail. Okay, press down with the bone folder. We've got the double half hitch, Okay, and we're gonna redo our little crease here. We're gonna come back over our spine and just flatten down the bumps, flatten down a little bit. I'm gonna take this over to the cutter and just trim off our foredge. So it's a nice flush cut book, flush cut foredge. And when I use the cutter on these, I definitely push down on this spine because again, it hasn't been pressed yet, so it's still a little bit bulgy. There's some air space in there. So I'm gonna press these now. We have a nice flush cut edge, beautiful chain pattern, nice neat interior. Okay. Good luck with these. Again, I would like you to turn in 8 books next Wednesday. So 4 of the sort of what I just showed you now, and then 4 with some things changing up, right? Maybe you do a 9-hole a 9-hole pamphlet. Maybe you use a different size paper. Maybe you use a different type of paper. Maybe you experiment with some different covers. You experiment with some folding covers, with some shaped covers. Yeah, do some practice, do some trials, make something that you're excited about. Okay, and I'm going to press these all in a little stack, and thank you very much.